Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. This time round, as cunningly hinted to in the title of the video you've already clicked on and the incredibly subtle thumbnail, we'll be taking a look at some alternative sports games. These games often take regular sports and make them a bit more extreme or turn them on their head. But just how do they do that exactly, and are they any good? Well, how about I shut the hell up and we just find out. Let's start with one of the most popular alternative sports titles around, Speedball 2, shown here for the Mega Drive, or Genesis if that's how you choose to live your life. The goal of Speedball is simple: get more points than the other team before the time runs out. Each team has 9 players with your usual Sportster positions, including a goalkeeper. At the start of the game, a ball is shot into the air and you have to run, slide, punch and throw it all around the court, scoring points in a few different ways. You can throw it into your opponent's goal to get the most points, 15 in fact. Alternatively, there's obstacles littered around the court that you can just throw the ball into for fewer points. However, these are often easier to hit than trying to get it past the pretty tough goalkeepers. There's also buttons on the walls that can be lit up for more points, and there's even ball teleporters that, if you throw it into there, make it appear at the other side of the court for an easy way up the run. It's not easy though, as the opponent teams are all pretty damn tough and they won't be taking it easy on you. In fact, I was absolutely annihilated the first 4 or 5 games I played of this, and it nearly made me give up. But as I learnt the best ways to tackle and some tactics to use, I did start winning and the game became very addictive. The controls here, they're pretty simple. You basically have a throw and a tackle button, and really that's all you need. Speedball is a rough game and there are no fouls, so make sure you hurt your opponents as much as you can. What's interesting here is that after each game you can earn money based on your performance, which you can then use to train your players to make them stronger, faster and more accurate. This is essential when you're doing the league, as there are loads of tough teams to play against. Unfortunately, the game does have one of the worst, most confusing menu systems I've ever seen, so figuring out how to actually do any of the training took way longer than it should have done. Graphically, the game, it looks okay. It's an early game and it shows. There's only ever 2 colours of teams. Player 1 is always silver, and player 2, or the computer, are always red. This isn't really an issue as it doesn't affect the gameplay, but it would have been nice to give the teams some of their own personality and variety. The controls are responsive, and though it can be difficult to make accurate passes or tackles, it doesn't really take away from the fun. But where it really shines though is in multiplayer. Playing the game against a friend is a blast, still to this day. If you like multiplayer futuristic sports games, then this is one that's well worth checking out, especially if you're lucky enough to have a friend. Let's look at some Mutant League sports now, also on the Mega Drive or Genesis, if you know the drill. Mutant League Hockey, you'll be shocked to hear, is a hockey game. Now, I have no idea what the rules are for hockey, other than you have to shoot the puck into the goal. So, as far as I know, the rules here are the same as regular hockey, including icing, which I have no idea what that is, and couldn't figure out how I kept getting it to happen, but it happened to me quite often. Anyway, you get to choose from a range of teams, all with different stats, and more importantly, monsters as the players. The teams all have some very 90s names to them, and I actually really like the style. You've got fat orcs that are slow but powerful, skinny skeletons that aren't too tough but they're fast, and it's cool to see the different players on the ice. As you're all monsters, as you can imagine, there's a fair few fights to be had, and thankfully one of your buttons just lets you punch the opponent rather than doing a fair tackle. This works pretty well. If you do get into a proper punch-up though, the game goes into a side-on view, where you'll get to see the 2 players go head-to-head and you've got to duke it out. These sections are actually quite difficult, at least they were for me. They looked really good, but the hit detection never seemed particularly good, though the computer never seemed to have an issue kicking my ass. I'm guessing most of it comes down to timing, but I found that I tried to avoid these fights, whereas usually they'd be exactly what I want in a game like this. There's also hazards on the court that you'll want to avoid. You can fall in holes, hit landmines or saw blades, and your players can get injured and have to go off the court for a while. Something you may have noticed in the footage is that everything is pretty damn choppy, and this is very true. While it does look pretty cool, the animation is, like I said, pretty choppy, and even the scrolling isn't that smooth, and it can make controlling your players tough, especially as it's all on ice, so it's already pretty slippery. Having said that though, the game is a lot of fun to play. There's pretty cool touches in here, like the ability to bribe the referee or just beat him up. And there's a bit of blood and guts if you lose the game, as you'll get punished by having your head cut off, which gives everything a wacky atmosphere. And again, this is another game that's really fun to play with another player. Getting into scraps and scoring is always fun. It's definitely not the best hockey game I've played, but it does stand out and is worth checking out. Mutant League also has a football game, or should I say really an American football game. I really can't tell you if this game is any good though, as I have no idea about American football, I'm really sorry. And to us non-Americans, it's probably the least accessible sport out there, with all your crazy rules and having to stop every 30 seconds. It's mad. There's loads of menus and plays and things like that, which I'm guessing people who know about American football will understand. But to me, I just had no idea what I was meant to do. It seems like you play for 5 seconds and then everyone just stops to line up. It does look quite good, and it plays a lot smoother than the hockey game, but personally I just did not have any fun with it. But I'm fully aware that that's probably because I have no idea what I'm doing. The controls did seem fine and responsive, and like I said, the graphics were good, and it still had that cool, crazy style. I'm guessing if you like American football, this probably isn't too bad, but don't take my word for it. Let's go to the Super Nintendo now for some Looney Tunes basketball. This is a 2-on-2 basketball game that takes more than a little inspiration from the NBA Jam games. In fact, it is literally just NBA Jam but with Looney Tunes characters, and there's a couple of power-ups thrown in for good measure. At the start of the game, you choose from your team of 2 from the usual suspects. You get Bugs, Duffy, Taz, etc. Sadly, there's no hidden characters to unlock, which is a shame, and even more sad, there's no Lola Bunny. In fact, there isn't really much of anything here. There's no game modes other than your standard 2-on-2 matches. You do get to choose how wacky it is, which determines the amount of power-ups you can get, but other than that, there's no tournaments or leagues or anything, just a single game of basketball. But that doesn't mean it's not fun to play, or does it? As you can see, the game actually looks really good with some cool animations, and each of the characters has their own special slam dunks and power-ups that are unique to their skill set, which is nice. As I've mentioned a few times, there are power-ups to collect. These range from custard pies to throw at your opponents, speed boosts, and something that makes the screen go black for a few seconds. I'm not really sure who that's meant to help though. These can come in handy, but to be honest, I didn't really find myself using them very often, and usually forgot that they were even there. The controls here are simple, but in a good way. You've got a tackle, a pass, and a shoot and a sprint button, and that's really all you need, though I do have to say the tackle button seemed pretty damn useless, and needs pixel perfect positioning, which would be annoying, but it's fun to say that, so I'll let them off a little. But yeah, it did mean the game basically came down to a case of you score, they score, you score, they score, and so on. Every now and then I'd get cocky and try for a 3-pointer, but if I missed, which I usually did, it would mean the other team gets the ball and then they'll just score, and if they get a few baskets ahead, I found it almost impossible to catch up again. And really, that's all there is to it. It's a very simple game of basketball. It is a bit of fun, but it could have been much more enjoyable if they just sorted out the tackling situation and actually made it work properly. While this is definitely never going to dethrone NBA Jam, or even the Space Jam game on the PS1, as the king of arcade basketball, it is a bit of fun that will entertain you for a while, especially against a friend. There's a running theme here, isn't there? Now for the mini versions of these punks, as we take a look at Tiny Toon Wacky Sports Challenge from Konami. This is one of those sports minigame compilation games where you get to choose from your favourite Tiny Toons, as you compete in some totally wacky sports, like throwing ice creams at pictures of Montana Max, lifting weights, slingshotting yourself towards a cliff and stopping as close to the edge as possible without falling off, and of course some foot races. Graphically, the game looks alright. There's some pretty big sprites, but not much in the way of animation, though it does all get the job done. The variety in the games is fine, and you get points depending on how well you perform in the games. You need a certain number of points to qualify for the next game. and as it's a sports one, it often has controls that require you to mash buttons and rotate the D-pad in a circular motion. Thankfully, for the most part, this is actually quite forgiving, and I never really had any issues controlling any of the games, except with a foot race one towards the end, where I just could not figure out how to do anything, and really that should have been one of the more simple games. You can play through the whole thing in single player, which just sees you taking on the computer and going through all the different game modes. It's a good way to learn how to play them. But of course this would be more enjoyable when you're playing it with friends. Though the problem with a game like this is that once you learn the games, you'll be able to win basically every time. So once you've gone through it a couple of times, it's unlikely you actually bother to come back. This is a pretty standard game compilation of this sort that we saw quite a lot in the 8 and 16-bit generation. It's not really a bad game by any means, it's just incredibly average and kind of pointless. The games are alright, but as I said, once you've played it a few times, you've seen everything there is to see. But if you see it at your local Blockbuster, then you might want to rent it for a bit of fun over a weekend. And finally for today, here is One Extreme, sometimes known as MTV Extreme Sports, apparently until they lost the license for it. This is a totally rad racing game filled with tubular tracks and rocking racers. Yeah, I'm going to stop that now. Released for the PS1 in the year that the game was released, what makes One Extreme Racing interesting is that you have a handful of modes of transport you can use to take part in the crazy races. You can choose from a skateboard, street luge, because apparently they're a thing, a bicycle and rollerblades. Each of these controls slightly differently, but really I found that it didn't really seem to make much difference no matter which one I chose. Usually though, I'd go for the luge just because it was the most ridiculous. Graphically, the game's pretty ugly. It's a very early game for the system, which definitely shows. The pre-rendered characters look terrible in the menus and not a whole lot better in motion. Most of the game uses 2D sprites for obstacles on the courses, but there are a few polygons here and there, none of which are particularly appealing, with a fair bit of warping. And the closer you get to anything, the worse the pixelation gets. To its credit, the courses you are racing on do all vary a lot from one another, but none are that fun to play on. There's gates you can go through, but I never really felt like it was punished, even if I missed 3 or 4 in a row. There's even other obstacles on the road, which range from construction bollards to boulders or trees that have fallen on the course. This is actually a cool addition, and it keeps you on your toes. Unfortunately though, the collision detection isn't great, so a lot of the time you'll just hit a pixel on one of them and you'll come flying off your whatever it is you're riding on, and lose valuable time and positions. The computer characters are all fairly tough to beat too. They do make the odd mistake here and there, but what is quite fun is, like the Road Rash games, you can punch and kick the other racers to make them crash. Even with this though, it was tough to win a race, and you'll definitely need a bit of practice to learn the courses. One of my biggest issues with the game though was just the lack of any speed. As you're not in cars, you can only get up to about 30 miles an hour, which, while kind of realistic, just doesn't give much in the way of excitement, especially when you're going uphill and the game just comes to a real crawl, and I honestly had to check the user manual as I thought I'd missed something out on the controls that would make me go faster. This wasn't the case, the game is just slow. Overall, I know some people have a bit of nostalgia for this game, but other than the novelty of having a few different things to race with, the game just wasn't much fun, even as an early game for the system. So there you go, 6 games that take conventional sports and turn them on their heads. What are some of your favourites? Let us know in the comments below. On the screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We would love you to come along for the ride in a street luge. Now all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and you know what? We'll see you next time.